And we are live, I think. Pretty sure I'm live and alive. Let's see here. I've posted on various places that I'm here, so I'm sure eventually someone will show up. Give it a minute. Hair's looking rough today, post-pandemic. It's all good though. Who will be the first to show up? Okay. So, what shall we talk about today? I've got a few things in mind. Oh, I see two people. Surely somebody will say something. So, a couple things I wanted to talk about today. For those of you who don't follow the numbers as closely as I do, so the COVID numbers in the US are looking pretty good right now. Looking really good, actually, compared to what they were just 4 weeks ago. So I don't know to what extent people actually look at the numbers, but I follow them quite closely, and it is a very striking difference in the total numbers compared to just 4 weeks ago. It's less than half. It's actually less than half of the total new cases that we have this week compared to the total new cases we had 4 weeks ago. So that line is just dropping really quickly. And we are now at the level where we were right around shortly after the end of lockdowns. So it was like late June, something like that. Greetings to you, Ross. What's happening? Good to see you. Yes, the king of, I'm the king of something, king of wishful thinking, perhaps. I don't know. But yeah, that has been something that has really made me happy. I make this map every week of whether the COVID cases are increasing or decreasing by state, and it's just I don't. It started as just something that I was just going to do for like a week or two because I was just bored and wanted something to do on the weekend. It doesn't really take all that long anymore. It took a little while when I first started it, figuring it out, but um, it's it's been kind of a labor of love that I've been doing now for like a year, and I think I started it in like April of 2020, and so watching those numbers go down so quickly, it's been interesting because we had the huge spike, of course, for the holidays, and it was just out of control, and then it dropped pretty quickly after the holidays. And then it sort of bottomed out in late February and actually started creeping up a little bit in March, just a little bit, not quickly, but like as we were getting vaccinated, people were also getting, I think, a little bit complacent and a little bit. We didn't have enough people vaccinated for people to be acting as they were. But once the vaccinations kicked in and that R value, as they call it, was kicked in, the numbers dropped really quickly. So now the numbers are less, like I said, less than half of what they were. So it was something like 241,000 some or something like that new cases in the U.S. this week, and a lot of other countries are starting to catch up to us when it comes to vaccines. Not catch up to us, but they're getting to the place where we were a couple months ago, which is great. A lot of parts of Europe are doing that. So what hurt Europe was the AstraZeneca thing. That was a problem, and there was also, so besides the AstraZeneca thing, it just seemed like all the rollouts were just slower there for some reason. But our rollout has been pretty quick, which is great. Yeah. So yeah, New Zealand. Yeah. So New Zealand is a special case, which is great for New Zealand. New Zealand actually had leadership that took this seriously from the beginning. They took it seriously early. Helps that they're an island nation. They were able to cut off, unnecessary travel and get things really, really on the right track very, very quickly. and their vaccination program. I don't know what percent they are vaccinated, but I suspect it's probably fairly high. And even if it's not, the total number of cases is so low that I would expect that it would be high. It would be very low rates anyway. So so yeah. Oh, you're in New Zealand. Wow, you're time traveling. It's like early morning Monday there. Jeez, it's already the work week. Um, so no cats. Yeah, I know. No cats, Bree. Not on this stream. Although if I hear one meowing at the door, I might let him or her in, depending on which cat it is. Yeah, I might hold up a cat here or there. Yeah, Gypsy might get excited and want to come in. She'll come to the door and go wow, wow, and or Mojo will come up to the door and go. He has a really tiny, high-pitched meow for a tiny cat, very small cat anyway. Um, so yeah, good old New Zealand. So Jacinda Ahern definitely wins some major props for that. She did very well at getting New Zealand through it. Um, yeah, I mean, leadership actually matters. It turns out, doesn't it? Yeah, it does. Definitely does. No matter how much you might want to think it doesn't, or be like, whatever, it's all about systems, or it's all about this or that or the other. Sometimes it turns out that it is actually a person and or a party that actually can be useful in getting a country through a crisis. It shouldn't really be that controversial a take, though there seem to be more and more people who are kind of political relativists, I guess. Thoughts on the Ohio vaccine lottery? So I read about that, and I thought it was interesting because in the Hawaii, or not Hawaii, why did I say Hawaii? Ohio, in that vaccine lottery, I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all. I think it's fantastic to do whatever is going to help people do it. I do think it's one of those things that's like, if you get it by X date, that's it. Or maybe you do like one other like later on. But I think it's a very small price to pay because I think the amount of money, think of hospitalizations and the number of people who are uninsured and the percentage of people who are uninsured who will then end up having to go to the hospital and then they'll go bankrupt essentially. And that'll take a toll on the economy, take a toll on families. I mean, yes, we should not have a healthcare system that even allows for that, but since we do until we don't, then yeah, I think having a vaccine lottery is fantastic. I think that if someone probably did a cost benefit and they're like, if we can get an extra 5%, 10% vaccinated of those people who are hesitant, then more power to them. I think rather. So Box Slave says, thoughts on vaccine hesitancy. I live in Western New York. Hey, I'm from Western New York myself. Well, Central New York, we generally called it, but I was born and raised in the Syracuse area, but have lived in Virginia since I finished grad school. So yeah, among coworkers, I know at least a dozen people who will never get the shot. So it's interesting. I've heard that there are these categories. So it makes sense to me that there are these categories for people who get the shot or don't get the shot. There's vaccine hesitant and there's vaccine resistant. In people who are vaccine hesitant, they're just like, well, I don't want to be the first. I'm like, I don't know, I have some concerns. I'll get it later. Those kind of people, which, okay, that's one thing, but it's a very distinct group of people. And that group of people, from all the research I've seen, sort of is a cross section, politically, socioeconomically. There's a lot of people in that group that are sprinkled in from everywhere. There are, I think, I don't recall the specifics, but there are some maybe general trends, but not anything that's like, oh, these are definitely these people who are vaccine hesitant. Whereas people who are vaccine resistant are heavily Republican. and tend to be much more male as well than female. That is a very, very much more homogenous group. Not completely homogenous, of course. Of course, there's bits of every socioeconomic class and everything else sprinkled in, but that group tends to be much more heavily Republican. So you can make of that what you will, but it makes sense, of course. So yeah, you got the hesitant, and then you got the resistant. So too much narcissism. I wish it were that simple. I mean, it can't help. I'm sure it's not, but it's who do you look up to? Who do you listen to? And there's a lot of these people, well, they listened to our former president. They thought that he was fantastic. And even without him going ahead and saying it, even with him saying, like, well, I'll take the vaccine, his actions of basically ignoring, trying to downplay the pandemic, and then getting COVID himself in what was called, I think, hilariously, the Rose Garden Massacre, which was, remember when they were introducing Amy Coney Barrett, and they had everybody on the White House lawn and did well, we're outside, we're not wearing masks, everybody's hugging each other and blah blah. And then later, like 20 people, it was, I don't remember what the total was, but it was literally like at least a dozen people that got COVID from that. And the thing is, the whole thing wasn't outside, some was inside too. So they were like, well, we're going to do this thing outside because that's what people expect because it's a pandemic and blah blah blah. But then they come inside, and then and then everybody gets COVID. Like, hey, you get COVID, everyone gets COVID. So they took marching orders from him, and a lot of these people who are now vaccine resistant have said that even if Trump tells them to do it, they won't. So they've already fixed in concrete their ideas about vaccines. So those who probably took all of their vaccines as kids, of course, they didn't have as much of a choice. But I mean, you take vaccines as kids, but they weren't certainly worried about it. Like, oh, I got the DPT vaccine, something happened to me, blah blah blah. So it's not really much of a thing. But those same people are now very much entrenched in that position of, oh, I'm not going to get vaccinated now because reasons. So I do occasionally stream now Freddie Mercury. It's been months since I've streamed or put out a video. I always, I see other people's videos, and I want to get involved in the conversation, and then I don't know. I occasionally feel like a bit of a dinosaur. I mean, I'm an old school YouTuber that started doing it over 10 years ago, and I haven't done very much at all in the last couple of years. So in the last 2 or 3 years especially, I've done very little. So in a way, I kind of want to get back into it, but in a way, I feel like I'm starting back at square one again, because a lot of the people that used to watch me regularly probably have no idea that I've done anything in the past few years because it's so far and few between. They probably just haven't noticed, which is okay. I mean, my life's good. My life has continued on. I have other interests as well. So, but doing this more regularly does hold some appeal. Part of it, though, too, is I feel like if I start doing this regularly and then like I don't do it for a couple weeks because I'm traveling, it's like, and a lot of this has to do with momentum. The people who are really big at this, who do this all the time, people like the Humanist Report and Vosh and even people who don't really do a lot of streaming but make a lot of videos, like Bo the Fifth Column or various other. Hassan Abi, well, no, Hassan is an example of someone who does a lot of streaming, but also puts out videos from his streaming as well. So, yeah, but it's interesting, and I'd like to do it more. But getting guests on, that would be interesting as well. Having conversations with people. I was having a conversation with someone on Twitter earlier, which was like annoying, and it was this guy that wanted to gish gallop for like 1,000 lines about everything that Biden has done or not done, and just I don't know. I'd rather actually have a conversation about that if I'm going to do that. But so Chad Atkinson says some people I know are so distrustful of the government that they won't get it no matter what. Well, the government didn't create the vaccine. The government didn't really create anything to do with this. I mean, that the Project Warp Speed thing, even Pfizer was like, remember when Trump tweeted, "Oh, good job, Project Warp Speed," and Pfizer was like, "Actually, we didn't take any of the Warp Speed money." And then Trump was like, "Well, whatever, blah, blah." He just kind of talked around it. So yeah, there are some people who think it's the government, as some people say, but it wasn't, and it isn't, and people should get vaccinated. I hope they do. Why do you not age? But I do. I certainly do age. Believe me, if you saw a video of mine from like 11 years ago, you'd be like, "Oh, he has aged." I mean, I try to keep myself in decent shape, and not just try to keep my weight under control, keep my eating under control, and not gorge myself with everything that I want all the time. So I have a reasonable amount of willpower, and I want to stay healthy because I would like to live a good long life. Thank you, but yeah, it's mostly just personal maintenance, and I go to the dentist like every 6 months, like clockwork. Haven't had a cavity yet, although they tell me I may. There's something that I might have to fill next time. For the first time, that would be the first cavity in my life. But I'm very big on personal maintenance. I do make sure to go to the doctor every year at least for a physical, and so that's, yeah, a lot of it's just maintenance. Just make sure. Bo, I do think, is awesome, and Bo, the fifth column, so Glitch 42. I would say that Bo is someone who he's a leftist. I would say that in general he's probably even left of me, although I'd be hard pressed to find anything that he has said or advocated for that I don't. But he's also the kind of guy that has a lot of sort of street cred, if you will, with people who might be a little more on the libertarian side or even on the more conservative side, because he's someone that is for liberty, and in the broadest sense of the word. So I think that helps for who he's talking to kind of draw them in and say, hey, I'm not just up here as like some elite, as they like to say, and telling you what to do and to do this or that or the other thing for social justice or something, even though he does talk about social justice, and it is important and something that he does, that especially when it came to the BLM protests and everything last year, he talked a lot about that. And but the delivery is important. The person who's delivering that message is important. There are people he could reach that I couldn't, just because of who he is and how he presents himself. So yeah. Box Slave says, I guess a little more esoteric, want to talk about the Overton window of the political spectrum in the U.S., how it historically moved toward the right in the last few generations. I do think that the Overton window has moved somewhat to the right, but I do think that especially in the past maybe 8-ish years, maybe less, probably even less than that, really, but last 6 to 8 years maybe, the Overton window has shifted right, but I think it's also shifted left, meaning the whole Overton window is now larger. There's more acceptable discourse on either side. That doesn't really very much help get either side accomplished in terms of legislation and that kind of thing. And it's very hard to get a government that has the president and the House and the Senate, as the Democrats do right now. But of course, that margin in the Senate is so narrow. It's just, everybody's always waiting for Manchin to do something, which we can't be reliant on him. So that's why we have to try to expand the majority next year if we can. So let's see. Freddie Mercury says, you helped me come out to my religious parents almost 8 years ago. So much in the world and the YouTube landscape has changed. Well, cool. I'm glad I was able to help. Yeah, that was, 8 years ago. So yeah, 2013-ish. Yeah, that's when people were actually talking more about atheism. That was a fun time. Believe me, that was fantastic, because that's obviously where I got my start, was YouTube atheism and talking about that. And that morphed into a bunch of other things that I was that I was equally into, but I didn't like. I didn't enjoy the discourse as much. I also came to realize over the years, as the discourse shifted, I realized how many people had come into the atheist community that I had assumed were a bit more like me than I should have assumed. I should have assumed that they were mostly, people who would also identify as humanist and that kind of thing. And they certainly, while they could of course be Republican. That's fine, whatever. But I did not. I underestimated the extent that there were real, like, dyed in the wool right wingers, very conservative people who would actually vote for Trump and who would actually be very reactionary when it came to things like, racial equality, that sort of thing. Like, people who I would have thought, like, oh, maybe would have been maybe lukewarm on it, but were just full on, BLM or terrorists, blah blah blah. That's what the kind of thing that they would say. There was a guy that I used to be friends with, and even met up with one time when I was in Australia. You remember, Mr. Stripey Head, or yeah, his name was. So he he also is channel, that One God One Jesus channel or whatever, and we used to be friends. And like, he started spouting off these like white supremacist talking points. Like, I would see things like, "Oh, it's okay to be white," and that kind of thing. And I was like, "Yeah, that's the definitely the language of white supremacists everywhere." It's not like I didn't have to read between the lines on that one. So not friends with him anymore. But I never would have thought that. Like, if you don't bring that sort of thing up, if you don't talk about that sort of thing, not only with people like him who I knew personally, but people that are just on your channel and enjoying your content and saying, "Hey, that's right, Zonstar, you're right," da da da, and then you start going on to something else, and then it's like, wow, how did I get so many right wingers on my channel? Like, who did these people think I was? Like, I mean, I did occasionally make political videos, so it wasn't like I didn't ever make them. But there were things, when there was anything to do with racism or anything like that, like, it would be very, very clear that these were right-wing reactionaries. So interesting stuff. So yeah. So Gamergate really took the angst of a lot of the more reactionary elements of YouTube. Yeah, well, oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, people like Sargon and other people. I'd say Armored Skeptic was at least in the beginning. It seemed like he was more along that. I don't think he is now. But Sargon has definitely. There was this whole class of people that were very much piling on to the anti-SJW bandwagon. I don't think a lot of people fully understood at the time. I definitely saw it, and I'm not saying that to just pat myself on the back. I mean, but I did definitely see it very, very early on, because whenever you have a wedge issue, if it's a wedge issue where almost everybody on your side agrees with it, but on the other side, if they're slightly split, those are the issues you want to hammer on. It's kind of like, remember when same-sex marriage was the big issue back, like, when it first started to become an issue in like the mid 2000s. At that point, even I was like, whoa, I don't know, this might be a bad idea, because this is gonna, I didn't really, for one thing, I didn't realize at first, that it was something that a lot of gay people wanted, was same-sex marriage. I didn't think it was. I thought it was some very small element of people. Once I realized that, very quickly, probably within like 6 months, I was like, well, yeah, of course they should be able to get married. There's no reason not to. I was worried about the fallout potentially, because at that point it was very much split for the Democrats, but Republicans were completely against it. Now it's the opposite. Democrats are almost entirely for it. Republicans are very much split, but they're split down the middle, and obviously the point is more or less moot at this point. Hopefully. So yeah, and as soon as I saw the anti-SJW rhetoric and was like, well, the right is piling onto this, and the left is kind of split, but and you also have people who are politically left who are also pushing this anti-SJW stuff to the edge. Like, and even I made a couple videos that weren't so much anti-estrogen. They were just kind of like, hey, this is too far, blah blah blah. But then I didn't do any more than that because I saw what was happening. Um, but now we just have to repair it as best we can. So yeah, and not smoking and rejecting Saturn may have a lot for your lack of aging. Rejecting Saturn. I'm not sure what you mean by that. My first car was no, actually no. My second car was a Saturn. It was kind of a crappy car, but let's see. Anarchy. Ah, there we go. That's the guy I was talking to on Twitter, and he was gish galloping all over the place. So in Biden's first 4 months, he pushed the Overton window to the right more than Trump did in 4 years. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, citation needed, first of all. Biden's first 4 months, he pushed the Overton window by doing what, I suppose? Okay, so Freddie Mercury says, I'd say Gamergate really took the angst of a lot of the more reactionary elements of YouTube atheism. Oh, yeah, I already addressed that one. So we should always ask about it in debates, Glitch42 says. Ask about what? What, Gamergate? So usually I'll use Roman God's name instead of God to show how silly it is. Yeah, that's not a bad idea. You can always say Zeus, or Thor is a particular favorite of mine. I don't do a lot of atheist content or even talk about atheism that much anymore. But it is certainly when you can do it in a way that is kind of taking it to the logical extreme, but not so much that that becomes the conversation. Saying something like that, saying like Zeus or whatever, or saying something like, well, they're or not Americans, humans have come up with thousands of different gods, and yet either one of them is true or none of them are true. Unless you want to, of course, go polytheistic, but regardless, so you can say that about religion. Just we've come up with hundreds of different major religions, at least dozens of major religions, and thousands of other sub religions, or various tribal religions over the centuries and millennia, and they're either one is right or none of them are right. So that's one way to go about it. It's not necessarily going to change anyone's mind, but you do what you can. You at least you keep putting seeds of doubt into people. If people want to approach you on it, the reason why I don't talk about it all that often now is because, well, and I also don't. I certainly don't. Unless someone wants to talk about it with me, I'm not someone that's gonna just jump in there and be like, oh, your way of doing things is crap. What gets me involved without them asking for me to be involved is when there is some element of humanism involved. They're actually doing harm. Like just having a belief, maybe it's silly, maybe there's a lot of reasons that it's not true, and I can show that it's not true. But if it's not hurting anyone, I'm just like, okay, whatever. It's kind of like flat earthers. There's only going to be so many people who are ever going to be flat earthers, but I'm also not going online and finding flat earthers to argue with. I just don't think it's worth my time. So never let issues like the role of women in structured society go. He will either hurt Republican turnout or alienate the moderates. Never let so yeah. I agree that we don't let it go. Those are things that are worth talking about. It would be good if there are ways of talking about it that will be more helpful than other ways. One thing that I've mentioned before, and I'll mention again here, is that there are a lot of people. Well, a lot of them are my friends too. They're very, very activist. They're very activist. They really are interested and into things like they're into things like politics, and trying to make change in the world, be the change you want to see, that kind of thing, which is great. But there are a lot of those people that don't understand how politics works. They don't understand. When I say don't understand how politics works, I'm not talking about like what I'm talking about is the actual inner workings of like, well, if you have the House, there's no filibuster there, and how the filibuster works. And then there are people who argue with me about things like superdelegates and stuff, and they don't realize that the superdelegate rules changed like 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I think, for Democrats. So you have to pay attention to the details. Otherwise, it is going to be very difficult to argue when people have two understandings of reality. It doesn't mean they're doing it from a place necessarily of they're not necessarily trying to do it in order to um, argue in bad faith or anything like that. They just may not know. So these kinds of things, they happen. Let's see. So the formal debate platform has kind of faded in relevance online. Politics panels like that on Twitch are kind of what I'm and it's predominantly left lib-leaning. Yeah, so there are people who debate a lot. Of course, like obviously Vosh comes to mind because he does that a lot. But there's other people who do that as well. So okay, anarchy is back. All right, my gish galloping friend. What do you have here? So Trump's border facilities were described as inhumane modern-day internment camps. Biden's facilities are 10 times more full with disgusting, unsanitary, and migrant over. So anarchy, what you're talking about is you're talking about media depiction, right? That's what it sounds like, because they're described as, I mean, described by whom? I would say that's media, right? So yes, there are probably, I'm sure there are some media outlets that are guilty of saying that, oh, this thing happened under Trump, and the same thing is happening under Biden, and therefore, we're going to call it two different things, right? That's what some people do, and I agree that that shouldn't happen. When it comes to talking about whether Biden and Trump are the same, this is the core of the issue that I have with this whole, oh, both sides are the same, or both sides are in collusion with, or colluding with each other, that kind of thing. What you can always find something. You can always find plenty of things, in fact, that have continued from one administration to the next. But when I ask someone, do you know what the beginning of the family separation policy was? Do you know what actually happened with this family separation policy? Without looking it up, do you actually know anything about how that happened under Trump? And I'm trying. I don't want to be overly aggressive with you because I'm not that kind of person. I don't really know who you are, but I want you to understand that when I get in these conversations with people, I am often in the position where I have to find sources and have to say, hey, by the way, do you know that it was Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, that actually he actually made this rule in like April of 2018, and that's why the family separation policy was in place, and that's what led to those conditions where the kids were being held or whatever. So Biden did not continue the family separation policy. He didn't have the same policy, but there are other policies that Biden has put in place that have not been helpful either. Like I would prefer that Biden would for refugee circumstances, they be put in place and allowed into the country and given good housing. That system was overwhelmed for a time, although as I understand it, it is not as overwhelmed right now. But you cannot. A lot of kids were coming across the border without their families. They were separating before going across the border, which is not great either. But what happened is they would end up coming over, and you can't just release kids to just any environment. You have to be super careful of where kids go. Imagine the blowback if the Biden administration, if and the people who were administering the disposition of those kids that came over the border, imagine if one of them ended up going to foster care and they ended up getting killed by the parents because they were unfit parents, or by negligence, or who knows what, or getting abused. It's just, you have to be super super careful, or else you're going to get nailed on the other side by having having negative consequences. Nobody wants that, and these are kids. You have to be super careful. So yeah, the system was definitely overwhelmed, and but the ultimate the decision that was made, the decisions that have been made in terms of policy, are taking some time. But some of those policies were reversed, have already been reversed under Biden. So yes, there are still border facilities that, at least as of a couple months ago, I think less so now. I haven't checked what the latest. What I don't know is, I don't know what the current occupancy is. The occupancy, last I had heard, had dropped, so it wasn't like it was. But I'm not sure I don't know what the amount is right now. Um, it is not something that is being covered as heavily. But the kids catching COVID and dying in those facilities, I can catch whataboutism too. So what about the kids? Okay, so yes, there probably were kids, but kids can catch COVID anywhere. They can catch COVID in school. They can catch COVID all over the place. I mean, we're talking, okay, we're talking about relative harm, right? Harm reduction. Your argument is that there was no harm reduced, okay? Which is, to me, is silly on its face. But we'll talk about it because it's. I'm not saying it's not something that can be discussed, but I'm telling you that I find it ludicrous on its face that there's no harm reduction. Um, sure, we can argue about things. There's a lot of things that I don't like about Biden, that Biden has done. I don't think things about pot, which you mentioned on our Twitter conversation. Like, yeah, he was definitely something that he's very much a boomer about pot. Though he's even the generation before boomer, technically, in the silent generation. But anyway, he's been what's happened is he has gotten rid of some advisors, I believe it was, who had smoked pot, which is ridiculous. I don't think that's a great idea at all. With Joe Manchin, he's trying really. I don't know what he's doing to try to get Manchin to get over the line when it comes to things like the voting rights bill and stuff like that. Manchin, he is representing a very conservative state where actually he's literally the only Democrat that could win in West Virginia. I live like an hour and a half from West Virginia. I've been there. It's West Virginia. It's exactly as you'd expect. It doesn't mean that I'm not saying that everybody's that it's like a backward place with terrible people. It's not anything like that. It's just that they're very, very conservative. You can't expect. It's not really realistic to expect someone from West Virginia to be that liberal. What we have to do is get people like Susan Collins out in Maine, which we should have been able to do but couldn't this last election, and people like Tillis in North Carolina, which should have happened last election. But hopefully we can get someone in for Pat Toomey, who's retiring in Pennsylvania. So, okay, Trump separated families across the American end of the border. Biden separates them at Mexico. So Biden doesn't actually separate them at Mexico, though the policy that Biden put into place, if a family is coming across, he's not going to separate the kids. I mean, so anarchy, the thing that caught the ire of the American public and was this whole firestorm for a couple months was that families were coming in intact over the border. And Trump's policy through Jeff Sessions was to literally rip the children away from the families, and no matter what happened, in order to basically punish them for coming over. So Yeah, I mean that's a pretty big difference. Yes, there are some kids who are being sent across the border. It is families, it is the families who are doing that. They're saying, "Hey, we need you to go across the border, and we know that you'll be put in some kind of camp, and then you'll be given a disposition to go either to your family who's in the U.S. or to a foster family or something like that." But I would prefer, you and I would both prefer, that they would accept all families intact. But what is the worst of those three options is ripping kids from the families when they all come over the border. That was what Trump was doing. So there's three different things that were there's three different possibilities. Well, there's really more than that, but there are three different possibilities of things that happened. The worst possible thing was what Trump was doing. That is the worst possible thing and the most traumatizing thing to those kids. So, what Biden is doing, I would prefer that they simply accept entire families and also keep them together. But so, isn't that a disgusting policy that rips them from their family? That's at least a choice of the family. I mean, at least that's a choice that they're making. Um, so no, I'm not even defending those actions. If you hear what I'm saying, I'm not telling you that's a great policy. I'm simply saying that I would prefer a better policy, but it is still better than Trump's policy, and it is less harmful than what Trump's policy was. Yes, I'm sure that is traumatizing as well. I'm sure that's definitely not great as well. None of that none of that is good. And so I would prefer that the situation with foster care be resolved and that pipeline be quickened. And while we're talking about this issue, you said that they're much more overflowed than they were. I'm not sure that that's the case. I believe that situation has gotten better in the last couple months. Um, so, I mean, you can that one issue. I would say that Biden is still half a step better, at least, than Trump was, and there are new regulations that are being determined all the time to see whether it can be improved even more. He certainly got a lot of pressure on to do it. Things like refugees. You want to talk about refugees? So Biden initially, to his detriment, because he should have changed this before. He was saying that the refugee cap was going to be kept the same for now, and then he would raise it later. A lot of people raised a stink about that, which they should have, and then he changed his mind. Do you think Trump ever would have changed his mind on that? No, of course not. You know he wouldn't. These are tens of thousands potentially of people per year that there is no way ever Trump would have let them in. But Biden is going to let them in. So that is a significant difference between the two. Okay, the 140,000 Asians he deported. Haitians that he deported. I'm not sure of that number. I know what that issue is because there were a lot of Haitians that after some of those natural disasters they were let in. I don't know that there's 140,000 that he's actually deported. Citation needed on that. That's very that's let's see. For the number of children, yeah, and exactly. Biden literally set up a task force to reunite families, and because of that policy has dropped the number of children from 5,000 to 630. Yeah, man. I mean, I haven't checked the source on that, but that is in line with what he said he was going to do. Again, I agree he could be better on this issue and any number of any issues, but it is not up to me to say like, oh, Biden could be better on a lot of issues. We agreed that Biden could be better on a lot of issues, but what you are trying to tell me is that it's nothing, whether Biden or Trump is in charge, that it makes no difference when it all is said and done, that the at least the average of harm is the same. Again, completely ludicrous. We can go through any number of issues, but the issue is not me telling you, oh, Biden could have done better. Because I could say that about any number of different things that he has. Oh, and by the way, climate change, you told me on Twitter that he hasn't said a word about climate change. Completely false. You could Google that. You Google that in 2 seconds and find like 5 different times he's talked about climate change and rejoining the Paris Accords, which he already did, and several other things that he's talked about. You said not a word. I mean, come on. You have to be. If you're going to argue about these things, you at least need to know what actually happened. That's what I'm talking about when it comes to we have to be talking about the same, you know, I wouldn't have a problem with your position if you spend your time criticizing Biden and attempting to push him left. Well, I'm not sure that he's listening to me, but yeah, I mean, if it would make you happy, I'll make a tweet about like, hey, Biden, you should legalize or decriminalize slash legalize marijuana. Great, I'll do that. I'll say, hey, your immigration policy is not good enough. You should do X, Y, Z to improve your legalization. So we talked about Bo the Fifth Column earlier. He had a very good video about that, about immigration from, this was like 2 months ago, at the height of the issue with the the overflowing migrant facilities, that kind of thing. So he talked about the things that he would do that are better, and saying like he understands what Biden is trying to do, but it's not good enough. And that's exactly where I am. But that is not anywhere near where Trump was. Trump could never have been moved off that line or off those things like refugees or climate change or any of these things. And I just think you're just completely ignoring, like, you're like, well, they're not any better at all because I don't care about these things where he's better, or he's not enough better for me to care. Like, okay, so harm reduction, you're saying that it's not harm reduction because it's not enough harm reduction. Okay, fine. But that's let's see. But that's not what we're discussing. We're basically trying to discuss. We're discussing two different things. He actually shut down the Keystone Pipeline. That was one thing that he did immediately. And let's see. And then you also have, and then the joining the Paris Accords, and also any other rules when it comes to gasoline usage for cars, that kind of thing. Some of the things that Obama had done for executive orders, that kind of, like, all of that stuff is now on the table. It would not be if Trump was still in power. So this again, it's ludicrous. It would never have happened. So, Lacking Channel says, I think the thing with Biden is that he's better than Trump, but requires more pressure than he should be. The minimum a center-left politician should. Yeah, I agree with you, 100%. I agree with every word of that sentence. You're right. I did not vote for Biden in the primary. I voted for Elizabeth Warren, which, a lot of my friends were Bernie supporters. They seem to hate Warren just as much as every other candidates, but whatever. So, let's see. Him backtracking on not increasing the refugee quota after backlash is a good example about that. Yeah, exactly. That was an issue that Democrats were very much, basically 100% in line. We were 100% in line with, as a party, as left-leaning people, wanted that to happen. But Biden, for whatever reason, was kind of dragging his feet on it. I don't know why, but we were able to put pressure on him and bully Biden, which people make fun of too. They say, oh, bully Biden, it's never going to work. Well, hey, guess what? It worked. And now tens of thousands of people are going to have much better lives than they would have otherwise. They're refugees. This is not just some small issue. Like, every time me or somebody else brings up something that's actually important and that actually affects people's lives, people will be like, oh, that's just some little side issue or something. No, it's not a side issue to these people who are coming from war-torn countries and looking for just a little bit of peace and some job opportunities, and to come here. I mean, I think that's fantastic. So I'm glad we were able to bully Biden into it, because there's no way in hell we would have been able to bully Trump into it. And that's why it's good that we voted him in. Paris Accords, yeah, I agree. Anarchy. We'll see if we actually, if we actually follow it. But the fact that we're at least in it and and not in a mode where we're just completely denying climate change, there again, still better. Let's see. The argument of harm reduction falls apart when you see all the harm that's expanded simply due to ignorance of people when a Democrat is president. So the refugee thing is nothing. Let me get that straight. The refugee thing doesn't matter. You're really saying, okay, you're really saying that harm's not really reduced because when a Democrat is in power, people get complacent? So then what? We should just have Republicans forever? Like, the solution is start 7 new wars? Okay, people's idea of what a war is also, I mean, that's a whole other can of worms. That'll wait till another that'll wait until another live stream at some point. But I have a lot of opinions on when it comes to things like use of force from a state example, not individual use of force. So yeah, you can be critical of someone while recognizing that they sometimes do good things. Just saying everything he does is shit is Fox News move makes it look like a hack. Yeah, it's kind of in that range, I'd say. So when I Google 140,000 Haitian deported, I only see a thing from 2016 when Haitian work permits were expiring in the Dominican Republic. Yeah, that's interesting. So Anarchy, if you can link that, go for it. I mean, but I hadn't heard that. And the thing is, I run in enough lefty circles that it would seem like I would have heard someone upset about that. And I have enough super activist friends that I probably would have heard about that, which is why I was surprised. He said he deported 140,000 Haitians. Did he really? Or is it just something that's like something has expired that needs to be renewed and hasn't been renewed yet, but nobody's actually been there's a lot of ways that people weasel into these. I do not like it. Let's see. I don't. So I agree. Even as someone who, if I was American, would have voted Bernie in the primaries, think it's good. Biden is better and can be pushed. Yeah, he can be pushed, and he obviously can be. He has been on things that are not just nothing. So in terms of invading other countries, so when we say something is an invasion, I'd like to see what the definition of that is. Obviously, these are not invasions of the scope or the importance of anything that happened in Afghanistan and Iraq. This does not mean that it's nothing. What happened in Yemen has been extremely bad as well. Although Biden has taken steps to get us out of, to sort of pull us back out of that. I don't think it's sufficient either, because because Saudi Arabia is the one that's essentially doing this, and since they're our friends, they're people that we should have pushed into not doing so much there. But yeah, so boots on the ground, okay, sure. Like I said before, 300,000 deportations total in his first 100 days. That seems high. What is the norm? So for one thing, I'd like to know what the normal number is on deportations, what the average number is, and were those deportations part of where this backlog from Trump, where it ramped up right at the beginning of his presidency and now is declining? Is that from that? Because there's just a lot of, again, don't really like the weaseling of stats. I'm not saying that you're necessarily doing that, but I do. It's something I see a lot is when people throw out these stats of this and that, and then people look it up and they're like, well, that's not actually true. Yeah, and you've already said like 2 different things that are just flat false. I mean, absolutely demonstrably false. So you're already, in terms of your credibility, you're already like kind of thin with me. So that 300,000 deportations in his first 100 days, I'm interested in that. I'd like to figure that after the stream, or if someone wants to take a look at that right now, great. Let's talk about that. Maybe he did do that, but again, that would be somewhat surprising. But yeah. So even on the argument of foreign policy, reversing Trump's awful policies that increased drone casualties reversing support for the Yemen policy. Yeah, and he has reversed at least some aspects of that policy. Isn't doing enough to put pressure on Saudi Arabia, which we could, but at least is not exacerbating the situation. And this is another thing when it comes to equivalencies. So Trump assassinated Iran's top general just over a year ago, and then Biden, under the Biden administration, we had some airstrikes against this border facility. It was a facility, or not a facility. It was like a checkpoint or building or something on the other side of the Syrian border, where they were firing rockets or something on the United States, and they took it out. And Iran was annoyed about it, but it was nowhere near, not even close to the reaction that they would have when Trump killed that general. And yet I heard a lot of lefties, tons of lefties, completely equating those two things. Like, oh, those are the same thing. Oh, they did the same, or not even, or even better. They said, oh, well, Trump didn't do X, Y, Z, didn't bomb Syria or something. I forget whatever it was. They said that, oh, Trump didn't do this, and it took Biden to do this. And meanwhile, nobody cared in Iran. These were some pieces of a ragtag militia from Iran that were in Syria fighting. These were not people that were irreplaceable, and it was honestly not a huge deal. I don't know necessarily that I agree with it. It's not something like, oh yeah, great, let's do that. But in terms of scale, it wasn't even close. And I saw all of the both sides of the same people coming out and saying, oh yeah, this is the same thing. Okay, sure. Let's see. It was an airstrike on Hezbollah, an Iranian-backed militia that operates in Syria and Iraq. Yeah, I believe it was. Yes, that was an airstrike Biden allowed the people to know. Oh, okay. So now we're supposed to be upset about things we don't know about yet. You don't think we would have heard about an airstrike? How many? Okay, airstrikes are something that are not that easy to hide. You think that airstrikes can happen? Oh, Jesus. Okay, so I know we're on the ground in Central African Republic. Yeah, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan. Don't know of any other active war zone. I'm pretty sure we're not in Yemen. Yeah, I don't think we're boots in the ground in Yemen, unless it's like advisors or something like that. I mean, special ops. I don't know, but whatever it is, you're not hearing stories about. You're not hearing at all about people coming home in body bags from there. So yes, we do have operations in other countries that happen, and we certainly have interests in some of those countries. We do a lot of things that are not great. Shouldn't be doing them, but saying that somehow Biden is doing this worse than Trump. I mean, like, so Biden's using Trump's law that says the government no longer needs to report drone strikes, airstrikes. He's using the law, so he hasn't changed the law, is what you're saying. The thing is, any significant airstrike is going to be reported. If someone's going to report on it, someone will find out about it. If an airstrike happens in Syria, the Syrian government is going to complain about it. If it's their people, they're not necessarily going to care. And by the way, they didn't seem to really care because they were just Iranian, they're just Hezbollah or whatever. So yeah, this is all kind of a supposition, I would say. Hardcore lefties don't know shit about foreign policy, and getting mad about especially Biden's drone strike in Syria just plainly shows that. Yeah, I would say it is. I would say that a lot of lefties are very, very pacifist, and I in general, of course, don't like war. Nobody likes war, but I would not describe myself as a pure pacifist. I mean, there are situations where intervention is necessary and good. Unfortunately, we've used a lot of that sort of moral capital or political capital or whatever on things that were sketchy, like Iraq for sure, and other places as well. So, but there are some things like with Kosovo, for instance, that we waited too long, honestly, to get involved with, because we were like, well, they'll figure it out, they'll stop. I'm sure they'll stop. But meanwhile, tens of thousands of people die. and get ethnically cleansed. And so it's not. It doesn't just mean we can't ever do anything with the military. I mean, the military is not. It's not something that necessarily needs to be off the table in every conflict. I'm not pacifist to that degree. So that's just maybe something that we disagree about. Let's see. Still should obviously and should be repealed. Yeah, I agree. I probably should be repealed. I mean, I'll look at the rules specifically, but it sounds like that's probably a good candidate to be repealed. So, yep. Let's see. Anyway, let's see. ICE data shows that there have been around 28,700 deportations in fiscal year 2021, but that includes aggregate data since October. Yeah. So that's a far cry from 300,000. So anarchy, there's obviously a big difference between what people are seeing. PolitiFact. Oh, so wait. You recall, was that actually was that something that happened, or was it was a fact check from like a meme or something? Was that where that came from? And anarchy, when I said people who can be replaced, anarchy, the difference in those strikes, Iran was super pissed because we took out their top general, someone that was very difficult to replace. That was under Trump. That was an extremely provocative move that could have easily spiraled out of control. The case here was that they hit some ragtag troops from Hezbollah at some border checkpoint across the border from Syria where they were firing rockets. Nobody cared. Iran didn't much care. I mean, Iran, I think they made some statement like, "Oh, this is crap," whatever, but nothing happened. And then Syria, same thing, complained like, "Hey, it's our territory, whatever," but nothing happened. It wasn't anything, not even close to what happened in January 2020. It wasn't even close. And yet everybody was trying to say that's the same. There's an article about the deportations. Okay, well, again, citation needed. But I'm sure we can figure it out somewhere. But so anarchy, this whole conversation has been interesting, and thank you for coming here and chatting with me. But there's a lot there are quite a few things that I think are riddled with inaccuracies, and then I think you're also just stretching super hard to make Trump and Biden the same, or to make their administrations the same, or whatever it is the final goal is. It's just not something that is even remotely compelling to me. So anyway, yeah. So I think I'm going to head out shortly, and any final thoughts? Throw them out there in the next minute or so, and we'll get this stream wrapped up. And I do hope to do more of these as well, and bring up some topics and talk to people. I like to have some people on too. Half of it is figuring out like what I need in order to get the not like a podcast, but how to get like people on Discord and how to send that through so that people can hear. I need someone who can handle the technical elements of that, or at least give me advice on the technical elements of that. So I mean, I'm technical enough that I can figure it out. I just need some advice from someone who does it. But yeah, so fantastic. So thanks for the good chat, everyone, and we will talk soon. Bye bye. Thanks, Crocodile Army.